In 1990, Republican candidates for office around the country received a mailing from a political action committee in Washington. It was a memo about words titled, "With no embarrassment at all," language, a key mechanism of control. Candidates, it explained, kept asking how they could learn to talk like the committee's famous chairman, a Georgia congressman named Newt Gingrich. So here, in writing, was the method. 2 lists. The first list held words to attach to yourself and your ideas: freedom, truth, family, prosperity, common sense. The second list, contrasting words, the memo called them, was for describing your opponent: decay, pathetic, radical, sick, betrayers. Read that second list again, slowly, and notice what it isn't. It isn't an argument. There's no policy in it, no claim you could check. It's a mood, prefabricated, packaged, mailed in bulk, a vocabulary kit for turning an opponent into an enemy. Now, here's how this episode is going to be different from what you're expecting. We are not going to spend it deciding whether the man behind that memo was a bad person. We're going to ask a colder and much scarier question. What kind of machine makes that memo a winning move? Because in the world we've spent 5 episodes building, sorted counties, uniformed voters, rooms that punish dissent, winning moves get copied. First, the honesty you're owed about what this episode is. It's a case study of one party, the Republican Party, over 60 years. That's the book's choice, and Urban is upfront about his own seat in the theater. He's the kid from the blue shoebox, a lifelong Democrat who says 6 years of research left his old views not exactly wrong, but not exactly right. And it's our choice too, with a promise attached. The machinery you're about to see has no party registration. And over the next episodes, we'll watch the same X-ray pass over movements the other coalition owns. If at any point tonight you feel the warm glow of being on the correct team, hold that thought until the end. It's load bearing. Because here's the frame that makes the whole story make sense. A political party isn't a creature with one mind. It's a coalition of factions, and episode 2 scaled up. Every party contains high-rung factions and low-rung ones. In 1964, a Republican think tank published an open letter drawing exactly this line inside its own party. The moderate, it said, accepts a complicated world with no total solutions. The extremist divides reality into 2 antithetical halves, good men and evil ones. Notice, that's not a left-right distinction. It's a rung distinction written by Republicans about Republicans in defense of their party's own high rungs. Every party has both. The story of the next 60 years is the story of which factions' tactics kept getting paid. Rewind to the early 60s, when the party's hardest line faction was a genuine underdog, passionate, organized, and rejected by most of the country and most of its own party. The liberal games, remember, offer an underdog 2 legal moves: persuade the country toward you or compromise yourself toward the country. Both are slow and expensive, and neither comes with a guarantee. But episode 4 warned you about the third option. Stop playing the game and start playing the rules. In 1963, at the Young Republicans National Convention, the faction's operatives ran a maneuver that historian Geoffrey Kabaservice reconstructed in detail. They held the chair hostage for 22 straight hours with an unending siege of procedural objections, filled the hall with noise until business was impossible, and ground the convention down until exhausted delegates went home, at which point the count that remained went their way. They may well have lost the actual vote. The chaos made a true count impossible, which was the point. While their opponents were trying to win the boxing match, they'd quietly won the referee. Hold on to the shape of that, because it's the episode's master pattern. When everyone else is bound by unwritten rules, the first mover who breaks them collects a prize, and the rule never grows back. The move costs almost nothing. It won an organization, and everyone watching learned something. Meanwhile, the environment was changing, and remember the season's one law: change the environment, and the same human nature produces new behavior. For decades, an FCC rule called the Fairness Doctrine had required broadcasters to air controversial issues with contrasting viewpoints. In 1987, it was repealed. The next year, a talk radio host named Rush Limbaugh went national, and by the early 90s, he was one of the country's most prominent syndicated political voices. In 1996, Fox News and MSNBC launched within months of each other. The old networks had broadcast one signal for everyone, which made neutrality a business asset. The new outlets could narrowcast, pick a tribe and serve it. And episode 2 gave you the vocabulary for what that does. A broadcaster is paid to think like a scientist. A narrowcaster is paid to think like an attorney. Nobody, any of these companies, had to be a villain. The rational response to the new market was confirmation, conflict, and a good clean enemy. Political junk food. Engineered for the primitive mind the way Skittles are, now mesh that gear with the one from the last episode. As the county sorted into landslides, most seats stopped being competitive in November. The real election moved to the primary. And a primary electorate is small, loyal, and drawn from the most committed end of the party, marinating in that same narrow cast media. So walk a mile in an office holder's shoes. Any office holder. The middle of the country can't fire you anymore. You're flanking. Every incentive you face, every donor call, every primary poll, every clip that does numbers now points one direction. Never let anyone stand between you and the enemy. That's the ratchet. Each escalation is individually rational. De-escalation is individually suicidal. And the memo from the cold open stops looking like an aberration and starts looking like what it was. A user's manual for the machine everyone was already inside. By the Obama years, the machine was mature, and you can hear it speaking through its operators. In 2010, the Senate's Republican leader told a reporter that the single most important thing his caucus wanted to achieve was for the president to be a one-term president. And in the same interview, that he was willing to meet that president halfway where their goals aligned. Both sentences were surely sincere. Only one of them was survivable inside the machine, and it wasn't the second one. A year later, after a standoff that took the nation's credit rating to the brink, the same leader observed that the fight had created an entirely new template, that raising the debt ceiling would never again be routine. Notice the grammar of that sentence. Not a boast, not a confession, a weather report. He was describing the ratchet clicking accurately from inside it. And in 2016, the machine administered its final exam to its own architects. A primary field of senators and governors denounced the eventual nominee in extraordinarily harsh terms, on the record, on camera, as a warning about their own party's future. Within months, many of those same figures had endorsed him. You can call that cowardice, and the internet did. But watch it as machinery, and it's more chilling than cowardice. The ones who came around ran the same calculation, got the same answer, and obeyed it because the machine had spent 40 years arranging things so that the base was the market, and the market had made its choice, and no politician survives his market. That's what the spiral means. It doesn't need anyone to turn the crank. The crank turns them. Now the clause this episode is not allowed to end without. Every component you just watched, narrowcast economics, junk food, headlines, primary fear, the loyalty test, is a machine part. And machine parts don't check your registration. The same years that built conservative talk radio built a booming blue audience genre, often organized around look how awful the other tribe is, played for laughs. An attorney with better jokes is still an attorney. The study from last episode that made conservatives more extreme in Colorado Springs made liberals more extreme in Boulder the same afternoon by the same mechanism. And the book is blunt about the other thing the comfortable version of this story leaves out. The voters inside the spiral had real grievances. Districts with collapsing incomes and shuttered main streets. People lectured at by a coastal culture that plainly disdained them. served by institutions that had earned their distrust. The machine didn't invent that pain. It monetized it, the way a machine on the other side monetizes yours. So if this episode felt good, and if you're on one team, it did, I built it. I know exactly which beats purred. Then you just felt the product working from the inside. The junk food tastes like information. That's the recipe. I'll go last, like always. Every draft of this episode wanted to be a villain story. I felt the pull in my own hands, cut the halfway caveat from the interview quote, and the leader becomes a cartoon. Keep the insults from 2016 verbatim, and the endorsements play as pure farce. Drop the paragraph about the base's real grievances, and everyone watching from Blue America goes to bed delighted. Each of those cuts would have made a better show. Which means I spent this week inside the exact machine I was describing, feeling the exact incentives. And the only difference between me and a cable producer is which market I'm afraid of. You're my primary, and don't think I don't know it. Nobody decided to break it. That's the sentence this episode exists to earn. The politicians responded to the voters. The media responded to the ratings. The voters responded to the media. And every single link in that circle was a human being doing the locally reasonable thing, including the ones watching, including this one. And now the promise from the top of the episode comes due. The machinery you just watched climb through one party has a mirror image. Same rungs, same third option, climbing through movements on the other side of the street. Movements with causes so plainly just that questioning their methods feels like attacking their goals, which is exactly the armor this kind of machine wears best. Next time, two movements that share every slogan and disagree about everything underneath. And the one question that tells them apart